Hi, and welcome back to Mallory in the Library. For those of you who joined us last week, thanks so much and welcome back. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. This week I have a few stories for you about textiles. Now in the comments, if you like, what do you think a textile is? I think when we think of textiles, a lot of us think of the sections. Maybe if you've ever been to a store that says textiles, where there are things like towels and rugs and blankets, and all of those things are textiles. So our clothing, sheets, blankets, I think I said blankets, and so textiles have different stories all over the world. Some people weave textiles, some people knit textiles or crochet, and there's all different ways that you can make them too. And lots of places use them to express their identity or show love. I know for me, I'm almost always wearing a handmade sweater because that's what I like to do in my spare time is make sweaters. And so for our three stories today, I want to start with some really special story called Extra Yarn. This story is by Mac Barnett and it's illustrated by John Klassen. You may have seen some of John Klassen's artwork in different stories, and if you haven't before, I would really recommend checking it out. And this book is dedicated to Stephen Malk and for Mom. On a cold afternoon in a cold little town, where everywhere you looked was either the white of snow or the black of soot from chimneys, Annabelle found a box filled with yarn of every color. So she went home and knit herself a sweater. And when Annabelle was done, she had some extra yarn. So she knit a sweater for Mars too, but there was still extra yarn. Mars is her little dog here. And when Annabelle and Mars went for a walk, Nate pointed and laughed and said, "You two look ridiculous." "You're just jealous," said Annabelle. "No, I'm not," said Nate. But it turned out he was. And even after she'd made a sweater for Nate and his dog, and for herself, and for Mars, she still had extra yarn. At school, Annabelle's classmates could not stop talking about her sweater. "Quiet!" shouted Mr. Norman. "Quiet, everyone! Annabelle, that sweater of yours is a terrible distraction. I cannot teach with everyone turning around to look at you." "Then I'll knit one for everyone," Annabelle said, "so they won't have to turn around." "Impossible," said Mr. Norman. "You can't." Mr. Norman, Annabelle. But it turned out she could, and she did, even for Mr. Norman. And when she was done, Annabelle still had extra yarn. So she knit sweaters for her mom and dad, and for Mr. Pendleton, and Mrs. Pendleton, and for Dr. Palmer, and for little Louis. She made sweaters for everyone, except Mr. Crabtree, who never wore sweaters or even long pants, and who would stand in his shorts with the snow up to his knees. "No sweater for me, thanks," said Mr. Crabtree. So she made Mr. Crabtree a hat, and even then, Annabelle still had extra yarn. She made sweaters for all the dogs and all the cats, and for other animals too. Soon people thought Annabelle will run out of yarn, but it turned out she didn't. So Annabelle made sweaters for things that didn't even wear sweaters. I think we can see the house, the birdhouse, the mailbox all got sweaters. Things began to change in that little town. Does it look different from the first page? Go back and look at that one too. This is think how things looked before Annabelle. And then a big change happened. News spread of this remarkable girl who never ran out of yarn, and people came to visit from around the world to see all the sweaters and to shake Annabelle's hand. One day, an archduke who was very fond of clothes sailed across the sea and demanded to see Annabelle. "Little girl," said the archduke, "I would like to buy that miraculous box of yarn, and I am willing to offer you $1 million. "No, thank you," said Annabelle, who was knitting a sweater for a pickup truck. The archduke's mustache twitched. "2 million?" he said. Annabelle shook her head. "No, thanks." "10 million, shouted the archduke. "Take it or leave it." "Leave it," said Annabelle. "I won't sell the yarn." And she didn't. So that night, the archduke hired 3 robbers to break into Annabelle's house, and they stole the box and took it to the archduke, who set off across the snow and sailed over the sea. Back to his castle. The archduke put on his favorite song and sat in his best chair. Then he took out the box, opened the lid, and looked inside. His mustache quivered, it shivered, it trembled. The archduke hurled the box out the window and shouted, "Little girl, I curse you with my family's curse. You will never be happy again." Uh-oh. That sounds pretty bad. But we can see the magic box making its way through the sea. And it ended up right where it was supposed to be. It turned out she was. What do you think of that one? It's pretty amazing how she makes all those beautiful gifts for people. So I wanted to show you something that I was made as a beautiful gift that my sister made for me with cloth and a needle and thread. And similar to Annabelle's sweaters, it makes my life much brighter. So it's always nice to share gifts with people. And so you may notice that many different places have different types of clothes and different types of textiles. We saw in Extra Yarn how there are many bright colored knit sweaters and textiles. And now I have a story from Ghana called The Spider Weaver. And this is a legend of kente cloth. And this version of the story is written by Margaret Musgrove and Julia Cairns. So I say this version because sometimes traditional stories and legends and myths are told differently by all kinds of different people. And there's different versions of illustrations and different types of ways that the story can be told. But this one is really lovely. Once, long ago, in the Ashanti village of Boniure, in the country of Ghana, there lived two expert weavers. One weaver was called Nana Koragu, and the other was Nana Emeya. These men wove simple cloth called Wen Toma, and everyone, from the king of the Ashanti people to the lowliest apprentice, wore it. Late one night, Karagu and Amaya went into the great Ashanti forest to check their traps for grass cutters, animals that they would bring home to roast. On this night, they found grass cutters in all three of their traps, and the weavers were very thankful. And I think that these little animals are the grass cutters. Karagu and Amaya were returning home when Amaya stopped suddenly. The light from his lantern had fallen on an amazing sight, glowing like moonbeams against the midnight sky. "Come, look, my friend," Amaya whispered to Karagu. "I see a small miracle." Might be kind of hard to see in this picture, but you might see a spider web with many different colors. The small miracle was actually a web, but never before had either of them seen such a wondrous design. Yet it had been woven with a single unbroken thread, a thread that was even finer than a strand of human hair. "Let's bring this treasure home with us to study," Karago whispered to Anea. Now we can see it a little bit better. Very beautiful designs. Amaya carefully detached the web from where it held fast to a banana tree, but as he did, the web collapsed, sticking to his fingers. "Oh, it is ruined," Karagu cried. "Now, how will we ever learn to weave this beautiful design?" Saddened, the weavers walked home. Their discovery was lost forever. When the men entered their village at dawn, Amaya's wife, Afia, came out to meet them. Afia offered them a calabash filled with cool water to drink. A calabash is a type of earthenware vessel here, and you can drink water from it. Neither man spoke as he ate. For this reason, Afia could sense that something was wrong. "Please tell me what troubles you," she said. "It is a beautiful web," her husband answered sadly. "When we tried to bring it home from the forest to study, it crumbled in my hands and was ruined." "Do you think you can find another one like it?" Afia asked quietly. Karagu was doubtful. This web was very different, very special, and no creature ever spins the same web twice. "Perhaps what happened was a blessing," Afia suggested gently. "Though you cannot find the same web again, perhaps you can find the same weaver." It's a good idea. And that is what Karagu and Amaya set out to do. Early the next morning, they eagerly made their way through the bush. Past the tall silk cottons and papaya trees, they found the banana tree where they had first seen the extraordinary web. What a forest! Sure enough, in front of them were the beginnings of a new masterpiece. In no time, a slender black leg emerged from the shadows and rested lightly on the silk threads. Amaya and Karagu could see the creature clearly now. The master web weaver was a lovely, large, yellow and black spider. Might be hard to see still, but if you can find it in the picture, let me know. As soon as they saw the spider, the men felt terrible for wrecking the magnificent web the night before. Now they could see that the web was the beautiful spider's home. Longing to take the web home with them, the weavers looked at each other, but neither of them wanted to destroy the spider's home a second time. They were about to leave when the spider looked directly at them and began weaving a dance. Dip, twist, turn, and glide. The spider made her way across and back over the web. She moved like a woman dancing, regal and very graceful. The spider wove on into the afternoon, and the weavers stood still in admiration as they watched her. At dusk, the tired but satisfied spider completed her creation. What kinds of colors do you see here? The spider moved sideways to the edge of her web, but before disappearing into the shadows, she turned in the direction of Amaya and Karagu. In that brief moment, the men were quite certain she smiled at him. Then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. The beautiful spider had shown the weavers how to weave new, intricate designs. What a wonderful teacher she had been, and what a wonderful gift she had given them. And she is smiling, isn't she? Have you ever seen a spider smile? With great joy, they returned to their village. In time, the weavers redesigned their looms so they could imitate the spider's weaving dance. At first, they copied her patterns in black and white thread, but soon they dyed their threads in bright colors and developed many new patterns themselves. And they named this new woven cloth Kente Ngwen Tanoma, what today is commonly called kente cloth. Have you ever seen this type of cloth before? It's very beautiful, very colorful. Everyone in the village wanted to wear this new cloth, but at first, only the king of the Ashanti people wore it on special occasions. As time passed, others were allowed to wear the new cloth too. Soon, the two weavers were well known across Ghana, and because of the spider's generous gift, they created designs and patterns that are still worn throughout the world today. And then there's some information. So sorry, give me 1 second. The trouble with working from home sometimes is that there are interruptions. So I have one more story for you today, but first, what did we think of that story? Has anyone been to Ghana or met anyone who is from Ghana or is from Ghana themselves? And have you seen this type of cloth before? So let me know, because I think that that's a great story. And now I'm going to share the story of Yetsa's sweater. This is a story that takes place in Canada, in British Columbia, and we'll learn some more about that. And so this one is by Sylvia Olsen, and it's illustrated by Joan Larson. And she says, for Laura Olsen and Mary Sam and the other Coast Salish knitters who have created the beautiful Cowichan sweaters. It's a bright Saturday in May. Yetsa and her mom walk down the road, through the oak trees, and along the trail to Grandma's house. Grandma lives near the beach, and it's chilly when the wind blows off the salt water. Yetsa wears her favorite sweater. It's too small for her, but she doesn't care. Yetsa has had it since she was little. It's toasty warm. It has waves and flowers and tiny salmon designs on it. Grandma knit it for her. Your sweater tells a story about your family, Grandma always says. I knit flowers on the sweater because your mom loves her garden. I knit salmons on the sleeves because your dad loves fishing. And I knit waves around the bottom because you love the beach. Yetza loves her sweater. She loves Saturdays, and she loves to go to Grandma's house to help her prepare wool. Grandma is out in the back adding sticks of fir and alder and maple wood to the fire. A round belly pot sits on a grate over the fire. The outside of the pot is covered with black soot. The pot is so big, Yetza could climb in and have a bath. It's filled with water now, but it's the wool that's going to have a bath, not Yetza. Farmer McNutt has sheared his sheep and brought all of his fleece to Grandma. Can I help? Yetza calls. Grandma holds her arms open and welcomes Yetza. I've been waiting for you, she says. We're probably all missing hugs from Grandma right now. Bundles of fleece are piled almost as high as Grandma. Black fleeces, white fleeces, and fleeces in different shades of gray. Grandma and Mom untie the bundles, shake the fleeces, and lay them on the grass. Yetza knows just what to do. She follows behind and pulls hay, prickles, and twigs out of the wool, tossing them into the fire. She reaches into a black fleece and pulls out a thick handful of dirt. At least, excuse me, she thinks it's dirt. That's a lot of wool. Yuck, 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 she hollers, shaking her hand like crazy. Sheep poop. Grandma and Mom laugh, and Grandma says, that old farmer McNutt, he's supposed to leave that stuff on the farm. This is the yuckiest part of the whole job, says Yetza. That does sound pretty unpleasant, doesn't it? Grandma checks the fleeces for any more sheep poop while Yetza cleans her hand. Then Yetza and Mom get back to work, pulling the rest of the barnyard mess out of the wool. When they are done, Grandma chooses a big white fleece and stuffs it into the hot water. She pours soap over the wool and gently stirs the pot with a long wooden pole. It looks like a witch's stew, laughs Yetza as she watches steam rise into the air. Grandma fills 2 more pots with cold water for rinsing. She stirs the washing pot a few more times, then lifts the wool with her stick and places it in the rinse water. The wool is heavy and hot. Mom gets a stick and helps her. Now for my favorite part, said Yetza. Yetza sinks her hands into the cold water to feel it turn warm from the hot washed wool. She swishes the long strands of wool around. She presses the brownish bits of the wool between her fingers and watches them turn white in the clean rinse water. She pulls big clumps of clean wool out of the water and dumps them into the final rinsing pot. When Grandma says the rinse is finished, they pull the wool out of the pot and twist it and twist it and twist it until all the water is squeezed out. Yetza's little hands have a hard time wringing out the heavy wool. By the time she's ready to hang the wool on the lines, water is running down her arms, under her arms, and down her legs. Look at yourself, girl, Mom exclaims. I'm going to have to wring you out and hang you on the line. Yetza feels cold and wet, but she is happy to see the freshly washed clumps of wool hanging in the sun and swishing in the spring breeze. Her stomach growls. Time for some fresh bread and blackberry jam, says Grandma. It sounds like a pretty good snack. Yum, says Yetza. Grandma's homemade blackberry jam is one of her favorite foods. After their snack, Yatza and Mom say goodbye. See you bright and early next Saturday, Grandma hollers as they walk up the path. We have a lot of work to do. Yatza and Mom arrive before 9 o'clock the following Saturday morning. Grandma is already outside, sitting on a lawn chair behind a mountain of white wool. Clean and dried, the wool looks 10 times bigger than it did before. Grandma, it looks like a big woolly cloud fell out of the sky and landed in your yard, laughs Yetza. Kind of does. Have you ever seen wool like this before? It's so soft and fluffy. Yetza and Mom sit down beside Grandma. They each take a clump of wool from the cloud mountain and begin to pull the strands apart. The wool gets even fluffier. Why is it called teasing when we pull the wool to make it fluffy? Asks Yetza. I don't know, says Grandma. I asked the same question when I was a girl, and no one knew the answer. When they have a pile of teased wool, Grandma starts up the carding machine. It looks like two of the biggest hairbrushes Yetza has ever seen, only much more dangerous. Grandma doesn't let her go near the machine when it is running. Yetza doesn't mind. She wouldn't want to get her fingers caught in the big, bristly metal tubes. Yetza hands Grandma some teased wool, and Grandma feeds it into the machine. She pulls the carded wool off of the machine with a long needle. It is soft and flat, with no knots or tangles. Just like freshly brushed hair, says Yetza. And ready to spin, says Grandma. It's a very cool machine. Can I help? Can I help? Pleads Yetza. But she knows the answer. Spinning is a hard job. The spinner is big, and Grandma has to use her hands and her feet at the same time to make it work. Once, when Grandma wasn't looking, Yetza tried to spin, but the wool got tangled around the machine so badly that Grandma had to break it off and throw it away. You can help by feeding me the wool, says Grandma. And when you are older and bigger, I'll teach you how to use the spinning machine. Yetza is very hungry after helping with the teasing, carding, and spinning. Her arms hurt, and her fingers are tired from pulling and pulling and pulling. The blackberry jam and fresh bread taste scrumptious. When Yetza and Mom arrive the next Saturday, Grandma isn't in the backyard. She is sitting in her living room on her favorite rocking chair. Stacked on either side of her in her big cedar root baskets are balls and balls of woolen yarn. There is black yarn, white yarn, and yarn in different shades of gray, wound as big as soccer balls. You've been busy, says Yetza. I sure have been, Yetza, says Grandma. I haven't stopped spinning since last Saturday. Now I'm ready for the winter. I have enough wool to knit many, many sweaters. That is a lot of wool. That must have been a lot of work on the spinning wheel. Yetza sits next to Grandma and watches her needles flick together so fast she can't keep track. She closes her eyes and listens. Clickety, clickety, click. Then she opens her eyes again and studies the white and black wool descending from the needles in a beautiful design. What are you knitting into this sweater, Grandma? Yetza asked. Grandma smiles. Flowers, whales and waves, woolly clouds, and blackberries. Who could this be for? So the Cowichan sweater, here is what Yetza's finished sweater looks like, with whales here and waves. It is from the Coast Salish group, which is one of Canada's First Nations on the west coast by the ocean. And so I see we've just about kept you for our whole time. And so I'm so glad that you joined us today and were able to share these stories about making textiles and making gifts and learning and sharing with one another. If you have any comments, I would love to hear from you, or any questions. And I'm thinking that next week we'll explore some books that use different types of verse, like poetry, to tell a picture book story. And so if you would like to join me then, I would love to share some more stories with you. Thank you so much for coming, and see you next week.